Culture. The acting economy. Screen tests. AI, streaming, and media fragmentation are changing the economics of acting.
The Academy Awards ceremony usually follows a similar script. On March 15th, actresses in gowns flashier than the paparazzi's bulbs will parade down the red carpet. There will be punchy jokes at the guests' expense from the host, Conan O'Brien, which will hopefully not provoke actual blows again. And then there will be the tear-laced acceptance speeches. Over the decades, hundreds of actors have stood on stage clutching the famous gold statuette and reflected on how they got there, despite the odds. Her dream came true, Anne Hathaway said. Lupita Nyong'o mused, no matter where you're from, your dreams are valid. Young, ambitious actors will no doubt appreciate words of encouragement, but for all the talk of dreams, many actors are finding show business a nightmare. Technological change, the rise of streaming, and a contraction in productions are taking the shine off the silver screen. At any given time, around 90% of film and television actors are unemployed, and just a tiny fraction can make a living from acting alone. But there is reason to think it is getting even harder. This is the most difficult time ever to be an actor, says Rod Cyrus, who graduated from Juilliard, a top art school, in 2023. He has an envy-inducing CV, theatre credits, a Netflix film, and a role in Ragtime, this season's most acclaimed revival in New York. Why does someone who has landed on his feet feel the acting economy is upside down? America's Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts the total number of acting jobs will be flat until 2034. That is a rosier forecast than many in the industry think is likely. In Los Angeles County, the film business workforce fell by almost a third between 2022 and 2024 as shooting moved elsewhere. From 2002 to 2024, the number of film tickets sold annually in America and Canada declined by more than 50%. From 2022 to 2024, the number of television shows produced, including streaming, fell by almost a third, and the number of film and TV productions by more than 17%. Theatres hosting plays and musicals, which serve as launch pads to screen careers, are also struggling. From 2019 to 2024, attendance in America fell by 37%. Studios already use technology to turn dozens into thousands. 20 actors were used to create a stadium crowd of 26,000 people in Ted Lasso, a popular show. They can also reanimate actors who have died. It is said that Val Kilmer will feature in the forthcoming Canyon of the Dead. Background actors, otherwise known as extras, who fill out crowds in film scenes but have no lines and can earn around $200 for an 8-hour workday, rightly worry that studios will replace them with AI. That would save money not just on actors, but also on the crew required to corral and manage them. Already, cast sizes are smaller than they used to be. The Economist analyzed nearly 40,000 films in the movie database released between 1980 and 2025. The median cast size of films was around 25 actors in the 1980s and 1990s. Starting in around 2000, that figure began to fall. In 2025, the median cast featured 18 actors, a 28% drop. Defining how AI can be used in filmmaking has featured in negotiations between studios and SAG-AFTRA, a union representing 160,000 performers. Having gone on strike for almost 4 months in 2023, the union is now reportedly asking studios to pay the guild royalties for using synthetic actors. This has been dubbed a Tilly tax, after Tilly Norwood, known as the world's first AI-generated actress. The rise of streaming has changed how lucrative acting can be. Traditionally, actors are paid an upfront fee and residuals if a TV show airs again. For traditional TV, residuals can be lucrative. The cast of Friends, for instance, still make millions each year thanks to reruns, even though the show stopped filming 22 years ago. But streaming residuals are more complex and opaque. Most services closely guard viewership numbers and are likely to be another sticking point in union contract negotiations. One actor whose career spans the network and streaming era grouses, "I've done good parts on Netflix shows. After that initial payment, the residuals just aren't that much." One bright, if less lucrative opportunity has arrived with a new format. Verticals, soap operas for the smartphone generation, have taken off on Instagram and services such as Reel Short and Drama Box. These are low-budget dramas with episodes that last between 1 and 3 minutes. They started in China during the pandemic, when film and TV production shut down, and are now popular in the West too. In 2024, they generated $819 million in revenue in America, mostly from subscriptions and ads. By 2030, according to Media Partners Asia, a consulting firm, that number is expected to rise to $3.8 billion. Budgets are low, usually around $150,000 for a 60 to 90 episode series, and production is quick. Shoots usually last 7 to 10 days, with 2 weeks each of pre- and post-production, according to Justin Saucedo of Lunatics, a vertical production studio. And the days are grueling. Ashley Michelle Grant, who has been acting in verticals since 2023, shoots between 12 and 20 scenes per 12-hour day. Still, it's been a wonderful way to act and still make a living, she says. Actors tend to fetch $300 to $2,000 per day. To succeed, performers must hustle in new, time-consuming ways. The shift away from in-person auditions to tape ones began during the pandemic, but has not abated. This means actors no longer have to live in New York, London, or Los Angeles, which is good news, but actorpreneurship takes time and a lot of mental energy. Andrew Dolan, an actor, estimates he spends 40 to 60% of his time producing auditions. This involves setting up sound and lighting, recording only when his kids are at school, editing the audition, and sending it off. Pre-pandemic, he used to get a script from my agent, focus on it, show up at 3:45 p.m. and just do the work of acting. To be cast, actors are also expected to have a social media following. Sarah Bei Cheng, a professor at the University of Toronto, says casting directors often ask about actors' follow accounts. Have they brought their own audience? The risk is so great that you want to know there's a dedicated audience before you sink money in. Posting behind-the-scenes videos to Instagram or TikTok can raise an actor's profile and lead to more work. So even when they land a gig, they have to document their experience performing. This preference for known quantities works out well only for known quantities. Last year on Broadway, George Clooney starred in Good Night and Good Luck, a play he co-wrote based on a film he directed. Ticket prices exceeded $800. The play set a weekly gross receipts record of $4.2 million, and the program noted that Mr. Clooney had never appeared on Broadway, so buckle up. Mr. Clooney received an estimated $6 million for his work on the play. To earn that much would take an average actor 257,180 hours or 124 years of 40-hour working weeks, without holidays. In acting, as elsewhere, the elites are accruing ever more riches, and the rest face uncertain prospects. No one will mention it in their Oscar speeches, but there is a new rule in acting. There are no small parts, only small actors, and what feels like ever smaller odds of making a living.
Culture. Book review. The Mysteries of the Mind. Mind over Matter. A new book explores the hard problem of consciousness. A World Appears, by Michael Pollan.
A fascinating but elusive phenomenon. It is impossible to specify what it is, what it does, or why it evolved. Nothing worth reading has been written on it. That is how the International Dictionary of Psychology described consciousness in 1989. Michael Pollan's excellent new book serves as a paginated retort to that last claim. The author, an American journalist, is best known for his work on food and diet. His pithy distillation of decades of research, Eat Food, Not Too Much, Mostly Plants, is the crème de la crème of dietary advice. More recently, he has been writing about mind-altering drugs, from psychedelics such as magic mushrooms to opium and caffeine. There has been a boom in books exploring consciousness, especially in animals. Perhaps it is because of the questions AI raises about what counts as life, or perhaps people are becoming more concerned about animal welfare. The latest, A World Appears, focuses on what David Chalmers, an Australian cognitive scientist, has dubbed the hard problem of consciousness, namely how human beings and other organisms experience things subjectively. This question has been occupying philosophers and scientists for centuries. One recent survey counted more than 24 competing theories. Rather than pitch his own favoured explanation, Mr. Pollan's book offers a well-reported tour of several theories. Academic philosophizing is not always known for being page-turning, but Mr. Pollan has a journalist's eye for the surprising and intriguing. Think it sounds boring to watch grass grow? Not in Mr. Pollan's account. A group of scientists is advancing the striking claim that even plants have consciousness, or at least might exhibit something rather like it. One researcher puts corn plants in a metal maze used to test the intelligence of mice and rats, then watches as their roots navigate towards fertilizer buried in one corner. Another, watching a video of a bean plant looking for a pole to grow up, speculates that, like bats and dolphins, plants use echolocation to explore their environments. Anesthetic chemicals, which shut down consciousness in animals, seem to have an effect on plants. An anaesthetized Venus flytrap will not close its leaves over an insect. If an anesthetic is a drug that removes consciousness, what exactly is it removing in plants? A World Appears covers more familiar ground too, such as a different batch of scientists hoping to create artificial consciousness in a machine, and even some who think they have already done so. Mr. Pollan is willing to push back against those he interviews when he thinks they are making unjustified leaps. At one point he offers a lucid critique of the widely held assumption that biological brains are analogous to electronic computers. Sometimes Mr. Pollan even makes himself part of the experiment. For a while he wears a device that beeps at random intervals, prompting him to note down exactly what his subjective experience was at that particular moment, such as, a beagle, off-leash, is walking towards me on the sidewalk. It sounds simple, but soon doubts creep in. Is wearing the device subtly affecting his thinking? What counts as subjective experience and what counts as mere context for that experience? Catching himself in the act of experiencing turns out to be frustratingly difficult. So does the challenge of answering the hard problem. For though the book is well written, richly researched, and a pleasure to read, it does not offer any firm conclusions. Consciousness researchers are like cosmologists, notes Mr. Pollan. They are unable to step outside the precise thing they are studying. In fact, it is worse than that. Cosmologists can at least agree on what their measurements show. But the hard problem is hard precisely because of its subjective nature. There is simply no way to step into someone else's head and check that their experience of the world matches yours. A World Appears leaves you with a universe of questions and theories. Consciousness is about information processing, says one researcher. Or perhaps it is a way for organisms to choose between competing priorities, others assert. All of this is, by any standard, quite heavy stuff. It is a mark of Mr. Pollan's skill as a writer that it never feels that way.
Culture. Leisure activities. That's how they roll. Adults are on board with life-size board games.
When you agree to a game of Monopoly, you are surrendering to two inevitabilities. One is that you will be hunched over the board for hours, pondering properties and mortgages. The other is that moods as well as fortunes can change with the roll of the dice. Many a game has begun in friendly spirits, but ended with the board, bills and tokens flying through the air. Monopoly Life-Size, an attraction in London, has blown up the game in a different way. Players step onto the track. As many as 24 players can compete at any one time. To acquire a property, they must not only fork out cash, but complete a challenge, clamber through a room full of lasers, say, or match artworks to their auction price. Despite these innovations, the game lasts only 80 minutes. Monopoly is one of a growing number of tabletop pastimes, moving out of the home and into destinations devoted to immersive gaming. Puzzles and games are the fastest-growing part of the toy market. According to Circana, a market research firm, sales grew by 30% in 2025, compared with 7% for the sector as a whole. Board game cafes and scavenger hunt companies are proliferating, as are escape rooms in which participants break free from a locked room by finding clues and answering riddles. There were fewer than 30 escape rooms in America in 2014. Now there are more than 2,000. This marks a shift in how adults are spending their time. Compared with previous generations, adults today are less interested in scoring and getting high than in getting a high score. Some 70% of players at Monopoly Life-Sized and 90% of escape room bookings are by over 18s. In the past, gamified attractions for grown-ups, such as arcades and casinos, involve gambling. The purpose of these new pursuits is not financial reward, but the experience, the quest, friendship, says Jasmine Caritas, a former video game designer who helps firms make their products more interactive. Little Lion, which runs indoor theme parks in Britain, inspired by TV shows and video games, says such experiences offer a bridge to our past selves. Those in the business are laughing all the way to the bank. An adult ticket to Monopoly Life-Size costs twice as much as the Monopoly board game. The immersive format has been on tour in America and Saudi Arabia and is going soon to Mexico and elsewhere in the Middle East. Its creators, it seems, are learning the lesson of the game. If you want to be a wealthy player, you have to build an empire.
Culture. Book review. A polite account of high finance. From Mean Streets to Wall Street. Streetwise by Lloyd Blankfein.
He was brought up in the projects of East New York, where your mugger could be your neighbour. Once his was. A bright child, he sent a moonshot application to Harvard. Somehow they said yes. Then it was law school, a stint as a tax lawyer, a move to a scrappy commodities firm, and, when that was bought by Goldman Sachs, a job with Wall Street royalty. Lloyd Blankfein felt like an outsider, he writes in Streetwise, even as he shimmied up banking's greasy pole. The chip on his shoulder has not fallen away. He has never felt at ease with the patricians of finance. He still has to concentrate to say rather, not rather. Mr. Blankfein's career coincided with a decades-long bull market fueled by globalization and a tech revolution. He became the boss of Goldman just months before the global financial crisis erupted. He devotes much of his memoir to describing how he ran the firm in 2006 to 2018. He took it back to the future as a merchant bank a la John Pierpont Morgan's, simultaneously advising, financing and investing, and trying to manage the conflicts of interest that inevitably arose. That called for decisiveness, but Mr. Blankfein also learned from underlings. "Tell me what you should do," he would say, "because then I'm going to tell you to do it." It wasn't always a joke. How I Ran the Firm memoirs can be turgid, but Mr. Blankfein has a light touch. He offers readers Lloydisms, as colleagues dubbed his quips, and the cheeky, often self-deprecating humour that was his trademark as CEO. Occasionally he would make Lloydian slips that got the firm into trouble, such as when he told a journalist Goldman was doing God's work. Those hoping for riveting stories from the bloody trenches of 2007 to 2009 will be disappointed that Mr. Blankfein offers little that is new. He has more to say about why Goldman came through the crisis relatively unscathed. Despite a reputation for rapaciousness, the firm discouraged a short-termist eat-what-you-kill philosophy among traders, he argues. A Goldman mantra is long-term greedy. Surely Goldman also benefited from its connections in Washington. It was known as Government Sachs because so many of its departing executives went into public service. Mr. Blankfein roundly and convincingly rejects the notion that the bailouts were designed to help Goldman. Instead, he reflects on how admiration for the firm curdled into hostility as the crisis dragged on. Goldman became a favoured target of the Occupy Wall Street movement, and the press, Rolling Stone memorably called it a vampire squid. Politicians sometimes seemed unable to decide whether the banks were stupid for getting caught by the mortgage credit bubble or too clever by half for trying to profit by causing it, Mr. Blankfein writes. He is coy on other topics. Diversity initiatives, a big business trend, get just a few sentences. Global inequality, even fewer. Tariffs, burdensome but sometimes unavoidable. Steady now. Politics, CEOs are better off staying away. This lifelong Democrats-only anecdote about Donald Trump recalls how gracious the future president was when Mr. Blankfein called to say sorry after a Goldman trader had badmouthed the Trump organization. Mr. Blankfein is most interesting when musing about how the financial crisis helped create the world as it is now, with its polarization, the rise of the hard right, rejection of institutions, and loss of faith in globalization. He is worried about new technologies. The next global financial meltdown is likely to be caused by a tech blow-up, perhaps a hacker or a fat finger, rather than lax lending. AI has catastrophic potential that could make a vampire squid look almost cute by comparison. Wall Street's critics have mostly turned to other targets, but today Goldman is much larger than it was pre-crisis, with its market capitalization 2.5 times higher. The firm, he argues, has no parallel at any commercial organization I know of. Was he serious all along about doing God's work? Cue that impish grin.
Culture. The Economist reads, Bookworm Food. The best new novels to read this spring.
When was the last time you read a truly memorable book? You know the kind, a story that keeps you up long past bedtime and has you waxing lyrical to any friend who will listen. If you cannot remember when that sensation last struck, try one of the novels listed here.
All Them Dogs by Jamel White.
After years of lying low, Tony returns to Dublin's underworld. He gets in over his head when he receives an offer to become an enforcer for the kingpin of a rival gang, and when he falls for his partner in crime. An electrifying debut about divided loyalties and unexpected desire.
Good People by Patmina Sabat.
The Sharafs, who fled Afghanistan for America, are hailed as a success story. But when Zora, their teenage daughter, is found dead, their reputation is called into question. Did this westernized woman bring shame on the family, or was she a victim of anti-immigrant prejudice? Told through eyewitness accounts, this tale is thrilling and thought-provoking.
Kin by Tayari Jones.
A beautifully written novel about fate and sisterhood. Two girls grow up motherless in the segregated American South. Nisi acquires an education and marries into wealth. Annie runs away to Memphis to search for the mother who abandoned her and finds herself in dodgy places with dubious men.
Look What You Made Me Do by John Lanchester.
Phoebe, a young screenwriter, has created a hit TV show about a passionate affair. Kate, a middle-aged widow, hears jokes and other intimacies from her marriage in the script. She sees her late husband in a new light and plots revenge, a dark comedy about success, betrayal, and generational conflict.
Lost Lambs by Madeline Cash.
The Flynns are a dysfunctional American family. Bud is suicidal. His wife is enjoying an extramarital arrangement with a neighbour. Their 3 teenage daughters are running wild. A chance to mend bonds comes from the unlikeliest source. A rollicking read with vibrant wordplay, quirky characters, and madcap scenarios.
A Private Man by Stephanie Sakia.
In an English village in the 1960s, a forbidden romance blossoms between David, a Catholic priest, and Margaret, a theology teacher. In 2018, Adrian learns about his grandparents' relationship while caring for Margaret, now in the grip of dementia. As her memory fades, he pieces together fragments of her remarkable past. A tender account of enduring love and a captivating portrait of 2 characters from an impressive new talent.
This Is Where the Serpent Lives by Daniel Muenendine.
A multi-generational epic set in Pakistan. Yazid grew up on the street, but rises through the ranks to become a chauffeur to an army colonel. Rustam, a landowner, tries to curb violence and corruption. Saqib, a farm manager, makes a rash, desperate attempt to better himself. This novel spans decades and skillfully weaves together stories to explore class, privilege, and ambition.
Your Life Without Me by James Meek.
This novel revolves around Mr. Berman, a small-town teacher who is mourning the death of his wife and struggling to connect with his daughter. His troubles multiply when he is summoned to a prison in London to meet Raf, once his prized pupil and surrogate son, and now a suspected terrorist. Did Mr. Berman unwittingly sow the seeds for Raf's destructive act? This slippery narrative yields surprises.
Culture. Backstory. Sympathy for the Devil. An Oscar-nominated documentary takes on patriotism, propaganda, and the limits of sympathy.
When suffering is abundant, compassion can be scarce, especially for countries that inflict the pain. Mr. Nobody Against Putin, a documentary that won a BAFTA and is up for an Oscar on March 15th, is ostensibly a study in propaganda and patriotism. Its real power, however, comes from its approach to a perennial challenge: whether and how to elicit sympathy for people on the wrong side. A town of 10,000 souls in the Ural Mountains, Karabakh squats like a prison camp amid straggly birch trees, slag heaps and smokestacks. Its Soviet-era apartment blocks have rickety balconies and exposed pipework. Snows thaw to reveal rutted roadways and cracked concrete. Life expectancy is dismal. It is a useful corrective to the impression made by glitzy downtown Moscow on suggestible visitors. Far more Russians live in bleak places like this, expecting little from the state and getting less. Karabakh is thoroughly unlovable. Yet Pavel Talankin, the endearingly goofy protagonist and narrator of Mr. Nobody, loves it anyway. The maze of pipes at the copper plant, the cryogenic winters, he describes them tenderly as a sonneteer might his idol's blemishes. He loves Russia too, he tells the camera, to which, after the onslaught on Ukraine in 2022, he confides his spiralling gloom. Maybe he loves it more than do Vladimir Putin's fans. Love for your country means saying, "We have a problem," he says. When the tanks start rolling, the propaganda kicks in. Mr. Talankin is the videographer at Karabash's school. To prove it is complying with Kremlin diktats, he films the pupils singing patriotic songs and honouring the flag, and teachers declaiming lies about history and the war. A colleague struggles to pronounce denazification, the word as clunky as it is misleading. Another rails slaveringly against parasites and spies, his latent jingoism unleashed. With ingrained Russian fatalism, Mr. Talankin's mother, the school librarian, keeps her head down and thinks he should too. Instead, he resigns because even a guy like me should have some principles. But after making contact with a documentarian abroad, he unresigns, resolving to film the abyss this school is sinking into. He records visiting mercenaries from the Wagner Group, showing the children how to spot landmines. Boys compete in grenade-throwing contests. Everyone is obliged to spout gobbledygook, a lesson in subservience in itself. Before long, the war comes home. Early in the narrative, Mr. Talankin warns a student not to flunk out, lest he wind up perishing in Ukraine. Soon young men are conscripted. Then they start dying. A favourite pupil's brother, an old classmate of Mr. Talankin's. He tapes the wailing of the dead man's mother at the funeral. It is tough to listen to, and hard to know what to feel, as is often the case with an aggressor's woe. During the Historikerstreit, historians' quarrel of the 1980s, for example, West German thinkers debated the proper way to depict the plight of German soldiers on the Eastern Front in the Second World War. Some thought their resistance of the Red Army should be recalled with dignity. Others, such as Jürgen Habermas, a philosopher, insisted that they enabled and prolonged the Nazi evil. Time can ease the awkwardness. In Letters from Iwo Jima, released in 2006, Clint Eastwood, the movie's director, evoked the desperation of Japanese soldiers in the eponymous battle, 6 decades on. The youth and fear of those enlisted into a guilty cause is clearer at a distance. As Ukrainians endure daily terror bombings, for many people it is, understandably, too soon for anguish over the predicament of Russians. Mr. Talankin understands that. By the summer of 2024, the police are onto him. Rattled, he says goodbye to his mother, a classic exile's farewell, in which nothing much is said and nothing much needs to be, and leaves Karabash, perhaps forever. Despite the wrench, he knows such burdens do not compare to the catastrophe in Ukraine, and says so. The tribulations in his footage are not what lingers, nor even its chronicle of brainwashing and tyranny's throttle. Rather it is the poignant, humanizing ordinariness. Their curriculum is deranged, but the students, some possibly doomed, are just like students everywhere. They mooch in corridors and get candy floss stuck on their fingers. Girls fix their hair as boys peacock. Teenagers smooch at a graduation party. Facing the sympathy problem, this film follows an old artistic rule. Show, don't tell.
by invitation.
Pedro Sanchez. The benefits of the Iran war are uncertain. The costs are sure to be huge. Pedro Sanchez is the Prime Minister of Spain.
Most people remember the scene. In February 2003, Colin Powell, then America's Secretary of State, stood before the UN Security Council and held a small vial for the cameras, supposedly containing anthrax. His message was simple. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. We need to attack it. Spain had its own version of that moment. Our Prime Minister at the time, José María Aznar, told the public, "You can be sure that I'm telling the truth. The Iraqi regime has weapons of mass destruction." Few believed him. Just 5% of Spaniards supported an intervention. In fact, millions took to the streets to oppose a war they saw as illegal, immoral and unnecessary. But Mr. Aznar dragged us into it anyway. The rest is history. A sad one. The Iraq War lasted 8 years. It claimed the lives of 300,000 people, most of whom were innocent civilians, and plunged the entire Middle East into worsening instability. It also triggered the worst wave of insecurity Europe had faced since the fall of the Berlin Wall, contributing to a massive surge in terrorism, a migration crisis, and price rises that eroded the purchasing power of millions of households. A war presented as a mission to spread democracy and peace delivered exactly the opposite. Today we face a similar situation, and my government's position is the same that the Spanish society voiced 2 decades ago: no to war. No to the unilateral violation of international law. No to repeating the mistakes of the past. No to the idea that the world's problems can be solved with bombs. This position does not stem from any antipathy towards the American administration, and even less from sympathy for Iran's brutal regime. My government has always supported the transatlantic bond, and it has repeatedly and unequivocally condemned the terrible harm that the Ayatollahs inflicted on their own people, particularly on women, and on many countries in the region. Our position stems from the fact that this war is illegal, a major threat to the rules-based international order and contrary to the interests of humanity. No one knows whether it will contribute to the fall of the hardline regime. What we do know is that its costs will be huge, and that they will not be borne by the Ayatollahs alone. Iranian civilians will suffer them disproportionately, and the rest of the world will follow with disrupted transport, higher prices, increased insecurity and greater economic uncertainty. Previous analysis by the European Central Bank estimated that a partial blockade of the Strait of Hormuz could lead the Eurozone to lose 0.7 percentage points of GDP growth and gain almost 1 point of inflation in a year alone. And that analysis didn't contemplate a military conflict of the scale that could now unfold. The war against Iran may serve to increase the profits of military-adjacent industries and to cover up domestic problems and shortcomings in certain places. But it will not serve to make Israel safer or promote a fair solution for Gaza. It won't weaken Vladimir Putin or make peace in Ukraine any easier. It won't help to eradicate poverty in the global south or tackle climate change, and it will certainly not deliver higher wages, stronger public services and better lives to our citizens back home. For all these reasons, we have decided not to authorize the United States to use the military bases located on our territory for this operation. This is our right as a sovereign country and a possibility contemplated in our bilateral agreements. It is also our responsibility as wardens of the welfare of the Spanish people, and it is our duty as members of the UN and firm supporters of international law. Real allies owe each other mutual support in times of struggle, but not blind obedience down a reckless path. War is not the answer. That is why we are working with our European partners and several countries in the region to forge a consensus for de-escalation, secure a ceasefire and reopen the route to diplomacy and peace. Some will say our aspiration is naive. But what is truly naive is believing that an escalating exchange of drones and missiles, like what we are witnessing, will lead to anything good. What is naive is to think that democracy and stability will emerge from the ashes. History has already tested that formula, and it does not work. Fortunately, we are not alone in this thinking. Many countries have advocated a similar view in the past few days, and I hope that many others will follow. The time has come to choose what principle will guide our common future in this century, the rule of force or the force of rules. Spain will always stand on the side of international law, cooperation among nations, and the protection of human life. That is the mandate that citizens give us when they elect us, and it is the only path that will allow humanity to move forward, building prosperity for all.
Obituary.
Nick White. Professor Sir Nick White, fighter of malaria, died on February 1st, aged 74.
Sweet wormwood, Artemisia annua, is not a distinguished plant. It is 2 feet tall or so, an untidy bush with feathery leaves and small yellow flowers. Yet Chinese traditional medicine admires it because the dried leaves, served as tea, lower fevers and clear the blood. And when, in the 1970s, artemisinin, the chemical responsible, was extracted from the leaves by Tu Youyou, the first Chinese woman to win a Nobel Prize, it was found to work powerfully against malaria. It was really, really good, Nick White told his colleagues, and in 1981 he raced to China to get some. It ruled his life for nearly 50 years. The healthcare establishment reacted with scorn. Implicitly, they distrusted herbal medicine. They were not sure about him either. A star student at Guy's in London, but a brand-new member of Mahidol Oxford Research Unit, or MORU, recently set up to study tropical diseases at Mahidol University in Bangkok. The powers that be also tended to overlook malaria, a disease of the poor and disenfranchised. Yet the facts were as plain as they could be. Malaria was the most important parasitic disease in the world, killing millions, mostly children, every year. The oral treatment for milder cases, chloroquine, was no longer so effective. Bed nets soaked in insecticide were useful, but could not work on their own. It was past time to find another drug, and new things always had to be tried, even if they were not quite ready yet. Thus began an epic battle of wills, he on one side and administritis, a dire malady endemic in government circles, on the other. The only remedy was for him and his team to keep researching and conducting trials, which he carried out in the 1990s in Vietnam and the Gambia. Africa especially worried him because malaria death rates were highest there. But the most useful and enjoyable work was among Karen refugees in the Shoklo camp on the Thailand-Myanmar border. His clinic was a wooden hut among leaf-roofed bamboo shacks, and the area was inaccessible except by foot, or 4x4, but there artemisinin proved itself. At first, used on its own, its efficacy faded so fast that patients needed 7 days of treatment. He realized, though, that it simply had to be paired with a longer-lasting drug to perform better. Armed with this artemisinin combination therapy, or ACT, he led similar work in both Asia and Africa. ACT, taken as pills, cured 98% of non-severe cases with few side effects. In 2006, the World Health Organization recommended it as first-line treatment in such cases. But it took 4 more years for the WHO to endorse his finding that in severe cases, injection of the derivative artesunate reduced mortality in adults by 34.7% compared to injected quinine. While they dithered, hundreds of thousands died. At Moru, he studied the malaria parasite deeply and, with his mathematical brain, calibrated the exact doses needed to defeat it. But field work preoccupied him, even in areas so remote that in the rainy season they could not be visited save by elephant. He loved the gentle, impoverished Karen people, spent time by their bedsides, and set up free clinics for them. For him, the war on malaria was summed up in their trusting faces. His fondness for Southeast Asia had deep roots. When he was 9, his family moved to Singapore. They took trips to the Malaysian jungle, hampered by his habit of lying down to examine intriguing flowers. He might have been a botanist if he were not so sure he wanted to be a doctor. At 23, then a junior doctor, he went to Nepal as a volunteer, to places days from any road. Where he finally staggered into one village, he found he was expected to be the dentist too. He was appalled by the state of healthcare there, and outraged by the careless practices of the institutions, such as the WHO and USAID, that were meant to help. His anger also boiled over at Banjul in the Gambia, when water was cut off at the Royal Victoria Hospital and he had to lug bucketfuls past sunning, oblivious tourists to treat the poor next door. Conversely, when he once found a needy group whose medical practices he approved of, he slipped them an envelope of $100 bills with an injunction not to tell his wife. From 2000 to 2015, his team was winning. Between those dates, deaths from malaria fell by more than 1/3. But the parasite had adapted, and even by 2009 was starting to resist. The case was pressing. By 2021 there was a vaccine, and he thought it okay, not very good, not very bad, but like the bed nets, it could not work alone. The fight required every weapon available. He had never been short of answers to problems. Good ideas poured out of him, and he relished communicating them, either in a lecture hall or when riding pillion on a motorbike, or in one of his 1,300 scientific papers, usually jotted down on a bench in a quiet spot somewhere. His response to the predictable but miserable growth of parasite resistance was to add yet another drug to artemisinin to make a triple combination. Once that was done, he wanted mass screening, identification of hotspots, malaria posts in every village, and mass administration of drugs. Even that would be a holding measure and might not work, but as with artemisinin itself, it had to be tried. A later slideshow featured 2 road signs, one to gloom and the other to doom. Yet gravitas was not his style. He was a natural joy-bringer, whether on his harmonica in the clubs of Bangkok, or in the cartoons he drew for his colleagues, or in his Oxford retirement cottage filled with rescued fledgling birds. The malaria parasite had been beaten before, and human ingenuity would beat it again. Almost as important as malaria in his life was the playing and following of cricket. He was once the proud vice-captain of the Thailand national side. In the Bangkok British club team, he was the fines master, gleefully recording ducks and dropped catches. He also fined himself each year, only half in jest, for failing to eradicate malaria from the world.